Hello, welcome to another edition of the Commons in Conversation. As you may already know, this is a new series that the Chronicle of Philanthropy is launching. It's part of our focus on the way that nonprofits and philanthropy can mend the nation's many divides. These are big topics, it's serious stuff, and that invites the question, is there any way that Hollywood can tackle these topics? Yes, there is, and today we're going to go to the movies. My guest today is Erik Bork. He is the writer, director, and producer of a new film called The Elephant in the Room. Welcome, Erik.
Thank you, George. Great to be here.
So I'll just summarize for a moment and then we'll get rolling with the questions. So the movie's The Elephant in the Room, and on one level, it's a romantic comedy. It's got two 20-somethings in LA who are sorting out all the hazards of modern dating. There's a nice illustration of the poster. But the energy and the genius of the movie comes from the tensions in the background. It's all taking place when the US is arguing about what really happened in the 2020 presidential election, Trump versus Biden, and our two heroes are on opposite sides of the divide. So Erik, start with a thumbnail sketch of the movie's central characters. Tell us about Leah and tell us about Vincent.
Yeah, thank you. So Leah is a progressive who, it's December 2020, so it's still COVID. She's horrified by the, election denialism, as she would call it, and kind of lives in a bubble of people that share similar views to her. She's in a life transition, is very lonely. She recently went through a breakup, and she's kind of house sitting at someone's house where a guy she doesn't know is also staying there, who becomes her friend throughout this. But it's a kind of a difficult friendship for her to forge with him. Meanwhile, she meets this guy, Vincent, who you see in the picture randomly, who's like a cute guy that they have a little bit of a fun dynamic, and he asks her to coffee and she's interested, then finds out that he voted for Trump both times and doesn't share her views that of the election denialism being so terrible. He's still kind of like not sure what he thinks about what happened in the election. And so they begin to kind of, hang out some. He's very open to her opinion and doesn't see that it's a problem that they have different views, but she's horrified by his views and doesn't feel like she could continue to see him or date him, but starts to kind of like give him a chance, hoping she might be able to impact his views in some way, which of course is easier said than done.
Yeah, it's a wonderful movie, and it just keeps rolling. That somehow I never would have guessed it, but the politics and the romantic comedy format fit together very tightly and very engagingly.
Thank you.
Tell me how you hit on this idea. This is, a bunch of movies are derivative. Like, oh, I've seen that 20 times before. This is in a category by itself. How'd you come up with it?
Well, the thing about romantic comedies is you always need the thing that's in the way of the relationship. That's the key, to that kind of movie. And I've written a few. I haven't produced any, but I've written a few, and I've always liked that genre. And so when I'm considering, writing something in that realm, it's always about, well, what's the thing in the way of the couple? And like a lot of people, political polarization has seemed like a growing problem to me. And when Trump was first elected, I definitely turned my attention to polarization as a thing that I thought was kind of the problem behind other problems that were going on in our country politically. And, it just struck me that is a good complication in the way of a relationship in today's world, because things have gotten so polarized that the idea of dating someone with opposite views is kind of unthinkable for some people. It's like a real deal breaker. And so as it became a thing in my life that, I had friends who had opposite views of me on all of this. And I tried to we try to hear each other out and so forth. Like everyone has had relationships during this time of people with opposite views and the difficulties of that. It just became more and more clear to me that it could potentially work as the main inhibitor of a romance.
So as you were writing the screenplay, was there a temptation to give one side the better of the argument, or how did you keep it balanced to the degree that it's possible to keep it balanced?
Yeah, I mean, I full disclosure, come more from the left, so I share her views more and live in her bubble, you could say, more. And so as I was writing his character, it was a little more difficult for me to imagine the Trump voter. Like, her views I fully identified with, and his views I had to kind of like try to figure out. And so the really cool thing that happened in this process is as I had written drafts of the script and I was still working on it and I was fundraising, I discovered that there are a number of nonprofits in this space, bridging organizations as they call themselves, some of whom came on as funders and helpers to the movie, which really, and then I started to learn more about their world and that movement and started to become much more committed and zealous about that as an issue. It wasn't just the topic I'm using in a movie anymore. It became a thing I really believe more and more strongly. And as I met these people in that world, some of them offered to give feedback on the script. Not that I had to take the feedback, but I was eager to. And some of the comments they gave, some of the most crucial ones, had to do with the Trump voter and how I could present a dimensionalized portrait of someone who, the thing with polarization is you assume people with opposite views have the most extreme version of those views and that they're all in lockstep with everything that you associate with those views, as opposed to people being complicated and having a mix of opinions and views and beliefs. Some they hold stronger than others, some are more flexible than others, so forth. And so I started writing him in a way that was more complicated and didn't just fit a stereotype that a left-winger would have of a Trump voter. And that was really helpful. They also gave me advice on just how to make it a less polarizing film in general so that people on the left or the right could watch it and hopefully identify with people on both sides, like the people on both sides, feel that they seem like accurate representations of people on both sides. Even though these are unique individuals, they aren't types that can stand in for every person, but that's the whole point. Everyone's a unique individual with a unique mix of views. So that's what I was trying to accomplish, and they definitely helped with that.
Give me an example of something you did with the Vincent character to make him more human or more nuanced so that he wasn't just a trope.
Well, the biggest thing I did was initially I had him kind of January 6th curious like himself and kind of wanted to go to that rally. And I just thought of him as a pretty much of a MAGA, full-on MAGA Republican that would have the red hat and everything. And over time I decided to give him a grandma character that he lived with who was the more MAGA person, whereas he was a little bit more moderate, although in that camp generally, but not super passionate about all the issues. It's not a defining thing for him that he wakes up thinking about every day, unlike the female character in this movie who's thinking about this all the time. So I softened all of that, and I gave him some views that some people might think that someone on the right might not have, like he's pro-choice and he's pro-gay marriage. And, he doesn't like certain things Trump has said or done and is pretty vocal about that, but he would still vote for him. He did still vote for him despite those things. So, and, January 6th rally, he's skeptical about going. And then when he sees the violence, he's horrified and he starts to believe the election wasn't stolen in the end, giving away the end of the movie. He wasn't really sure prior to that, but then he started researching it and going outside, the normal things he would use to look at politics. And kind of that's a one way she influences him in the end. Not one issue he changes, although not really on other issues.
Does she change at all?
She changes not in her political views, but she begins to change on the topic of, can I accept him as he is, which is kind of the bigger theme of the movie, accepting people as they are versus trying to change them. And is it helpful to try to change someone and make them better, especially if they're in agreement with it, or is it better to let people be exactly who they are? So that's sort of a thing that's being explored throughout in a couple of different ways in the movie, a couple of different relationships. And so she becomes more open to getting to know him despite finding his views, like at least a lot of his views, unacceptable. So that's the change that she's challenged to make, whereas he's already open to other people's views and he's more challenged to change his view, at least on one thing.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a moment ago that some nonprofits provided support and also some extra perspectives for you. Give me an example of a suggestion you got from them or an element of input that was useful, and then maybe one where you said, actually, that's not how we make movies. So maybe one.
I don't know if there were any of those, but I mean, not having that character go to January 6th. I mean, some people said, one note I got in the script was, if he goes and he actually gets injured, which originally he got injured, not because he was trying to break in, he was like with a large group that just kind of walked in and didn't see any cops. But in the crowd, he got knocked down and injured. And like, there was a Zoom FaceTime call with her where he's got like blood on his face. And one of the things somebody said was, funny, I didn't think of this because I'm a liberal myself, but they were like, that image of him having been there and being bloody could trigger the people on the left so much that they will not accept her like dating him beyond that or giving him another chance beyond that. So that was one example that just came to the top of my mind. Probably more of the examples were things that would make that would soften his character. I'm trying to think of ones where I just kind of rejected. I'm sure there were some. None are coming to mind that I was like, I disagree. There were probably some that I didn't do for sure. But they all came from a place of, okay, these make sense and these potentially could help. And I think the majority of them I worked with and tried to integrate.
There's the classic give him a puppy approach, but I think you were fairly moderate in your use of animals on this one.
Well, I gave him a grandma that he lives with and he loves. I mean, I definitely did stuff to make him kind of cuddly as possible so that people would not only root for the relationship, because in a romantic comedy, you need to kind of like both people and like them as a couple. And I think, yeah, I did a lot to make him lovable, so that people on the left could say, I disagree with him voting for Trump twice, but he's a great guy. And I kind of almost am impatient with her for not giving him more of a chance, even though I agree with her politics, which some people who've seen the movie have definitely said that.
I had the same thing too, that she was getting a little precious, but that's all part of the art of bringing us three-dimensional characters. As you think about Hollywood more broadly, how much of a willingness is there to explore political themes? How much is the feeling that no matter what you do, you lose half your audience? What's the appetite?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't necessarily have my finger on the pulse of all of Hollywood in that way. But I do think, yeah, it's traditional view is you stay away from that stuff because you're going to alienate people and they're going to be distracted by the politics and not get involved in the story and the characters, or not like what you're doing because of your obvious political bias, and also that it's a downer of a topic. It's not like an escapist fun topic. It's a thing that we're bothered by. And so we don't really want to go to entertainment to see those issues be argued about. We'll watch the news for that kind of thing. I think people tend to feel. So I don't know that there's a large appetite to explore, to really come right out and explore people on opposite sides of this political moment or the recent political moment, could call it the Trump era, and kind of arguing the two sides as entertainment. I think you see it slipping in here and there, but it's not. I don't think anybody thinks, yeah, we should do more of those. Audiences are dying to see that in a movie. And that's, of course, how Hollywood thinks. Are people wanting to see it? Are they going to pay to see it? Are they going to pay to subscribe to this service if this is our featured show this month? And so they tend to think audiences, I think rightly, are looking more to escape and to have kind of candy and not medicine, or not something that's like, oh, here's more about politics, or here's here's life during COVID, because there's even a little bit of that in this movie. And I think that the standard feeling is people don't want to see that, and we're in a business where we make things that we think people want to see. So that's my opinion anyway, my sense of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, with one of the things we're doing with the Commons is exploring polarization in a lot of areas, and that takes us into race, that takes us into urban, rural, that takes us into gender. Are some of those themes ones that are easier for Hollywood to get to, or do you run into the same problem everywhere, that it's a downer and it's medicine instead of candy?
I don't know. I think Hollywood is mainly these days, Hollywood, I think, does have a kind of a liberal bent, you could say, for sure. And I think they're really trying to, their main thing is like underrepresented groups being better represented, both in the creative process and in the stories and characters being depicted, because Hollywood's been called out many times over not doing that enough. And I think there's a big appetite to try to do more of that, which I think is very laudable and important. I think that's more the focus, as opposed to bridging divides between kind of opposite groups.
Yeah, no, that would square with just my lay impression as well. We all have backstories, and I think we had an interesting conversation the first time we spoke about your own encounters with polarization and opposing views. Is there anything, as you think about your growing up years or before you came into the movie industry, where you just encountered people on different sides and a desire to see if there was a way to bridge it?
I mean, I grew up kind of a left winger with a Republican dad who had voted for Nixon and Reagan and everyone. So there was a little bit of that growing up, but I wouldn't say it was a big issue for me until, around the time that Trump got elected. And I had a close friend who was a Trump voter, an avid Trump supporter, but had and this has inspired the movie in some ways and this character, very different views than what I expected a Trump voter would have. And he didn't like him as a person. He didn't respect him so much as a person, but he liked the policies, most of them, although there were a few key ones he completely disagreed with, but he was willing to overlook those because he liked the other ones so much, whether it was immigration or China or trade policy, more isolationism and things like that. And he actually saw Trump as, which I think some Trump supporters do, as a more anti-war type of figure because of the whole America First isolationism, not be involved in NATO as much, not be involved in foreign wars. That surprised me because I didn't think of him as the peace candidate, so to speak. He didn't strike me as. So it was interesting to get to know somebody who had pretty educated and well-informed views to justify his positions, which I still didn't agree with, but I could see his point on certain things, or at least see how he got there. And it made it a more nuanced conversation. And it was interesting trying to, keep a friendship going when that was such a core element of conversation that we generally didn't agree on.
Nice. So for viewers who want to see The Elephant in the Room, tell me a little bit about the rollout strategy and when and where people will be able to see it.
Yeah, well, we're in the final negotiations on a distribution deal that I'm really excited about with a company that's going to do a limited theatrical release in early 2025, probably like February-ish, in select cities, which are TBD what those cities are. But we will probably do one night only special events in different cities where there's an additional element beyond just screening the movie. We might have representatives from bridging organizations leading discussions, for instance, after the movie and things like that. Cast and crew might be present at some screenings. So that will probably do a premiere in Washington, D.C., and we might try to get some influencers there because some of our executive producers are very tied in with some very high-level people in both the political world and the nonprofit bridging world. So, we will try to get the buzz and awareness of the movie out there through having a theatrical run and having that premiere and doing what we can to loop in our partners in the bridging world to talk about the movie as much as possible as it kind of tours around and plays in theaters in different cities. And then eventually we'll have a full digital release where it's available online for rent and purchase and, maybe on a streaming platform, maybe not. These days, the big streamers don't tend to take independent movies that don't have big stars. So that's an uphill battle in the marketplace. So I don't know that it will ever be on Netflix or Hulu or HBO, or Max, but it will definitely be available on other platforms, including eventually, the free, but you have to watch ads type of platforms. At the end is where most independent films eventually can be seen, like Tubi and things like that. So it's a lengthy run on these different platforms, but probably beginning around February of next year. And we're still raising money to fund the whole publicity and promotion and marketing side of that so that we can really get the word out and have the movie reach as many people as we can.
Terrific. And what would your takeaway be for people watching the movie? What would you expect them to know or feel or believe afterward that maybe they didn't coming in?
I mean, I think the main thing it seeks to do is just in a lighthearted, soft, not in your face way, in a pleasurable kind of candy versus medicine way, make you watch the struggles around polarization in a real life scenario that isn't triggering politically. It's not triggering emotionally to make you, harden in your opinions. If anything, it will probably make you go, oh yeah, she should get more of a chance, even though I agree with her politics. Or it's like, oh, it's cool that they're actually discussing this stuff and they're kind of moving through a difficult situation. So I think it kind of gives hope, and it makes people think about and talk about relationships that they have with people on the opposite side of things in family or friends or even romantically. And I guess hopefully makes them reconsider, am I too much in my bubble? Am I too hard edged? Would it be better to be more of a listener and more of a bridge builder than to just kind of like stay in my lane on my views?
Terrific. Thanks so much, Erik, for sharing a bit about it. The movie is The Elephant in the Room. There's a link in the chat that'll explain how you can see a preview and learn more about it. And appreciate the chance for you to be part of the comments.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure, George. Thanks, everyone.
Terrific. We will have more discussions like this coming, and I just want to give you a couple moments of preview of what's coming next. So on October 16th, Neil Lynn Parker, who is part of Search for Common Ground, will be talking about efforts to head off election clashes this fall before the trouble starts. And then on October 30th, we will hear from Amy McIsaac. She heads a project at Philanthropy for Active Civil Engagement, PACE, and she will talk about the way that we use civic language and what's productive and what's ineffective in the terms and phrases that people choose. Thanks so much for joining us, and make watching the Commons and Conversation a habit. We do this every 2 weeks. Bye now.